Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zum Zulieferertag Automobilwirtschaft 2020. Eine gemeinsame Veranstaltung des Wirtschaftsministeriums Baden-Württemberg, der Landesagentur e-mobil BW im Rahmen des Strategiedialogs Automobilwirtschaft Baden-Württemberg. Diese 22. Ausgabe des Zulieferertags findet für uns alle in einem besonders herausfordernden Jahr statt. Die Auswirkungen der Corona-Pandemie, die Auswirkungen des Lockdowns haben insbesondere die Automobilwirtschaft und ganz besonders die Zuliefererindustrie hart getroffen. Das verlangt nach Anpassung von Strategien, neuen Lösungswegen und nach konkreten Unterstützungsangeboten. Deswegen haben wir für Sie auch das Format.
This is why we have chosen this format for you as suppliers. So we were looking for new solutions, how we can support you, the suppliers in Baden-Württemberg. Instead of being live on site here at Neckar Forum in Esslingen, we run a digital event for you. Under www.zuliefertag-bw.de, we created a forum where we present all the topics that are important for you and to provide information. We use this thrust in digitalization, voluntary or not so voluntary, to foster this exchange with you. We want to provide information and support programs and point out what is possible. On the website I just named, you find all the information for the transformation of knowledge exchange. I am Isabel Knüttgen, Director of Knowledge Management, and I will guide you through this Automotive Suppliers Day. I can tell you it's a really special atmosphere. We are standing in an empty hall to make sure that we meet all the requirements for the COVID-19 pandemic protection measures and still offer you this event. Now, right at the beginning of this event, I would like to thank all our partners. This is the Handelskammertag Baden-Württemberg, Wirtschaftsförderung Baden-Württemberg, VDA, VDMA and RKW Baden-Württemberg. Now, before we start, I would like to give you some housekeeping matters so that we get through the day without interruptions. The first hurdle you have already managed. If you can see me, you have logged on successfully and the live stream is started. If you want to adjust the volume, you can do that on your end device or on the volume bar that you see right underneath of the live stream window. The live stream can be stopped at any time. There's a button on the bottom left. And below the window of the live stream, you find a registration window. This is where you can pose your questions. Because we want to interact with you, we want you to get involved in the Automotive Suppliers Day, even if you cannot be here live. So please pose your questions whenever you like. You can ask our minister, you can ask Mr. Logan and all the speakers that we will have here today of the VDA and VDMA as you like. I will see your questions here on my iPad and I will read them out, and hopefully you will get good answers to your questions. So much to the technical matters, and now I'm looking forward to welcome our first guest. And I'm looking forward to welcome Dr. Nicole Hofmeister-Kraut, our Minister for Economic Affairs, Labour and Housing. She is having a really busy year. The last few months were so packed with appointments and meetings and video conferences, and we are happy to have her here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Knüttgen. I would like to greet you, Mr. Logan. I would like to greet all of the speakers today, the participants of the panel discussion, and of course everyone out there who has switched in online. we have lots of people have signed up, and here in the Esslingen Forum I usually talk to a full audience, but the corona pandemic has really posed important challenges here, and it was important for us to actually keep up this offer of the Automotive Suppliers Day, because it's quite important, and to give you a virtual meeting today. And I'm really happy to have us here today, and I would like to greet everyone from Belgium, from Denmark and Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to greet all of you. Welcome to the Suppliers Day for the automotive industry Baden-Württemberg in the year 2020. It's the 22nd Suppliers Day, so a format where we actually have exchanges. Our encounters here today are rather virtual, unfortunately, but it's a virtual exchange for us as a state, for our structure and suppliers. It has a high importance. And I'm very delighted, Mr. Logan, and thanks to you and your team for actually having made this hybrid format possible today. And I am certain many of you who are attending today have been making experience in having these virtual meetings, and that's why I'm quite certain that we will have a successful discussion today. We will just be discussing current topics, future trends and challenges, but, and this is something important to me, about the opportunities that are given to us through the structural change, especially in the field of suppliers. So there is ample opportunity for discussion, and you, our suppliers, you are currently in a quite extraordinary situation. You are at the center of a far-reaching structural change, a transformation process, and through Corona, this process has been accelerated. Many people say Corona acts like an accelerant. You have made enormous investments in new technologies in these changes, and because of the drop in production quantities, we have an economic downturn in the automotive industry, and this has started last year already. So you have dropping profits as well, and now you need to cope with this corona crisis on top of that. Our manufacturers, our suppliers, our factory equipment providers, but also the automotive business sector, they're worried about locations here in Baden-Württemberg, and in some cases entire companies are affected. In certain fields only parts of these companies, but what we notice is that unemployment in individual areas is also on the rise. So there is urgent need for action, which we are determined to tackle in Baden-Württemberg. And our common objective, and I think that's very important to say that because we have to do this jointly, our common objective should be to ensure the mobility of the future and to have it made in Baden-Württemberg. And that's something we can accomplish. We have the best conditions. Mobility is going to change significantly over the next few years, especially because of technologies, new possibilities of machine learning, artificial intelligence systems. There will be different modes of transport growing further together, and new mobility services will be provided. We have to adjust to this, as already today AI algorithms have a huge impact on mobility, and also the software and electronics architecture in the vehicle itself, as well as in the infrastructure, are going to change. And on the one hand, this poses additional challenges to the automotive industry on top of the transformation of drive systems, but on the other hand, it also offers huge potential for the future of the suppliers and service providers here in the state, especially in the field of electronics, sensors and actuators, but also software. So in the future, vehicle electronics will be based on software architecture and software functionalities. And this is rather an opposite approach than the current vehicle development, where the complexity of the connected cyber-physical system cannot be validated. With this new design engineering approach, a vehicle can be configured similar to a mobile device and can be updated over years. As early as in the design phase, the validation of these vehicle functions will be taken into account. And we want to pick up on these topics with more intensity, and we would like to better pool the competencies which are available in our state and enhance them. We want to be your partners. And we have already been in close contact with the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs, and we are fighting for getting financial leeway as part of the federal government stimulus package. Ladies and gentlemen, our response to transformation, first of all, we need to have impressive technological innovations in the central fields of alternative drive systems, autonomous and connected driving, digitalization and artificial intelligence. On the other hand, the related new mobility solutions and business models shouldn't be left out, because they can dramatically shift weights in the global economy. In Baden-Württemberg, there are experts, specialists and hidden champions for almost every challenge, and many of you are out there today participating in this meeting. So the initial situation is good, but the challenges are even bigger. As early as before COVID-19, this economic downturn and this far-reaching structural change in the automotive industry were overlapping. Budgets for these investments are currently earmarked for coping with measures that need to alleviate the corona crisis. These emergency funds can give short-term support here, but they do not substitute a strategic transformation process with regard to new products, mobility solutions and markets. So in this process, we need to remain open to new things, technology and progress. We have to consider them an opportunity and not always ask for the hazards and risks first. So we need to proceed further in order to secure added value and employment here at our locations in Baden-Württemberg. And that's why we need to create the right conditions. And the right conditions are, once and for all, we need qualified employees, so training and further education also needs to be taken into account here. We need to focus on new technologies even more. We need an innovation-friendly environment, and we need a performant infrastructure and uniform tax conditions, so our production locations can actually keep up with international competition. We need the right framework conditions for technological leadership in the new drive technologies, but also in the field of digitalization and mobility. So we can actually ensure added value and future employment here in the state. Driven by climate protection measures, climate change and societal developments, mobility is going to rapidly change and further develop. Germany and the EU have agreed on international obligations and have decided relevant regulations, rightly so. If climate targets are not complied with, penalties need to be paid. At the European level, we have the Green Deal and the announced raising of the EU's 2030 climate target from 40 to 55 or even 60% compared to 1990. And this further enhances the direction already taken. That's why we need to tap all potential in order to achieve these targets. But of course, this path needs to be feasible for us, and that's why we need to take into account that in mobility we usually have three paths that to make energy fully regeneratively available in vehicles. First of all, it can be stored as electric power in batteries, as hydrogen, or as regenerative synthetic fuel. That's why I clearly am committed to a technology-open and target-oriented approach, exploiting all potential the different drive systems offer us. Limit values are indispensable for achieving our climate protection targets, and they ensure, as target marks and regulatory framework, to have a certain planning certainty for the automotive industry and politics. Everything needs to be done in a joint dialogue with all stakeholders. These limit values need to be defined jointly. The framework conditions need to be defined. Also, the instruments and the funding programs shall be created together, which make it possible to actually achieve these very ambitious targets, because that should be our claim. Setting targets, that's one step, but the other is to actually achieve them. That's even more important. And they need to be accomplishable. And this must be possible without short, medium, or long-term risks or jeopardizations of employment in Europe. What is undisputed in this process that every additional gram CO2 savings causes additional costs, and these costs need to be borne by manufacturers, suppliers, and customers, and can also lead to drawbacks in global competition, and we need to take that into account as well. Ladies and gentlemen, transformation is posing great challenges, especially for our medium-sized companies. That's why, together with the state agency e-mobil, we have created a neutral point of contact, a state agency offering consultancy services. It's called Landeslotsenstelle Transformationswissen BW. Please go to this website and inform yourself, because lots of shareholders have been taking part in this from the strategic dialogue for the automotive sector, and it's a platform actually conveying knowledge and making available networks and contacts. In the strategic dialogue for the automotive sector and the Transformation Council, for which I'm in charge of together with Mr. Port and Mr. van Platen, we have initiated lots of lighthouse projects. With DigiBat Pro 4.0, we have created the basis for the settlement of a cell manufacturing business, because electromobility, the battery, is playing an even bigger role. The demonstration project U-Shift was also something we developed, and we're testing new vehicle concepts. On the 17th of September this year, the mock-up was presented at the interim results conference of the strategic dialogue, and it had its world premiere there. We also have a joint project, Agilo Drive, where we develop technology, flexible production for electric motors. And zero emission, that's the topic of hydrogen, where we turn the location of Lampolzhausen into a nationwide lighthouse. So you notice a lot is in the pipeline, and we're doing it for you, for the people in Baden-Württemberg. Ladies and gentlemen, the coronavirus pandemic is currently one of the biggest challenges in the history of our state of Baden-Württemberg. To protect our population and to alleviate the effects of this pandemic, the state government has initiated a large number of measures to fight these consequences of the pandemic, especially for our economy and the municipalities. We have set up targeted emergency packages, and already in September the Cabinet decided on the measures package entitled State of Baden-Württemberg, State of the Future, Stronger from the Crisis, and a total of 1.2 billion euros will be earmarked as reserves for the future in Baden-Württemberg. We make it available to the economy here. We want to provide the right impetus for the stabilization and strengthening of our location, making it sustainable, and 350 million euros from these reserves will be earmarked for investment innovation programs for strengthening the location of Baden-Württemberg in BEW Invest. And here as a state we also want to have a share. We want to help innovation and investments stay here in this state and be invested in future technologies. And what we also want to do is we want to create more demand so that Baden-Württemberg is secured as a location. That should be our common goal, to emerge stronger from the crisis, so that we all benefit from that when the economy recovers again. And the third quarter looked quite good. We had lots of catch-up effects that came to the fore. Because of the second part of the lockdown, we cannot really forecast the development in the future, but lots of good decisions have been taken. within our companies, but also at the state and federal level. And I am aware of the fact that we all need to take our share here. We need to pull our weight in order to be successful as an economic location in the future. We have brought a lot on the way already, and I am certain that many of you and we here today will get new ideas from this exchange, be creative and innovative, and think these topics through. I would like to wish you an interesting exchange, many new insights, inspiration, impetus that you give to each other, but that you also take home. And please be intrigued and be inspired. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hofmeister-Kraut, for this introduction, and I think you have given us a very good framework about everything that we covered today. The openness for technology, the framework conditions, the challenges ahead of us. And now we have gained a good impression on what the state of Baden-Württemberg has already undertaken in terms of action. Thank you very much for your presentation. You were right on time. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you. And as usual in COVID-19 times, we have to disinfect the surfaces before the next speaker, Mr. Logan. He's the CEO of the e-mobil. So before he can give us his introductory words, he is very pleased that the Suppliers' Day can take place today and that he is here to talk to you. So, Mr. Logan. Ladies and gentlemen, and visitors of the Suppliers' Day, I would like to say welcome, but that is not what it's about, and that's why I say to all the participants and everybody who is working towards a good automotive industry. And it's all about getting involved, and that's why we want to give you some stimulus today. Our minister, Dr. Hofmeister-Kraut, already said it. We are undergoing multiple changes, and many things bring uncertainties in the economy. One thing is dealing with overcapacities, which have built up over years, and where the pandemic is now putting a focus on. And the second point is, who are the partners with whom we trade, and what are tariffs allowing us to do? And the third point is the technological transformation. And I would like to emphasize one more thing, a point that Dr. Nicole Hofmeister-Kraut already mentioned. We need to work on software, artificial intelligence, and software architecture. We have to put into the center of our interest because it is as important as the transformation of the drive technology. So this could make us afraid, but if we're honest, these topics bear the opportunities that we should take. We mustn't forget that some transformations we have already undergone. The drum brake, activated by a rope, these are things from history, just like the wooden wheel. And over the history of the automotive, you can see that we are undergoing a continuous transformation. The transformation right now is an important step in technology and a leap. But this also serves us as an opportunity to enter markets. So we can think about how to deliver batteries, how to deliver applications for software, and so forth. So this is the best opportunity to enter the market. And we do have some certainties. Certainties that the electromobility will go ahead in the market and penetrate the market, and not only for passenger cars, but also in terms of trucks, which we want to electrify. to make sure that also in the field of trucks we can make the traffic easier on CO2 or defossilize. If we think of other fuels without chemical fuels, it won't be possible to keep mobility in the future going. Well, chemical fuels also include hydrogen, synthetic fuels, and so forth. And you out there, as specialists, you know quite well how many components are needed, like pressed metal, aluminium cast, or plastic injection molds, so that these technologies can become reality. And we know that we have to build up capacities. And this is not only to build electric vehicles and charging stations, but that we also promote and build hydrogen stations and companies that make synthetic fuels. So these are technologies we will see for the next decades. And for the people amongst you who want to shape the future, you can break that down in your thoughts and you can focus on your components and you will find them in the topics I just mentioned. So what I want to tell you is the opportunities are there, we just need to grab them. And our perspective should be, how can we use these opportunities, how can we build up new technologies and contribute to this new world, and all this parallel to the sadness that we have upon losing what we have now. We will have a multi-perspective look at it, and I would like to repeat what Mrs. Hofmeister-Kraut said. We'll give you information, we'll pass on knowledge, and I would like to remind you that we have been active for more than 10 years in the cluster Southwest for electromobility, and experts are working on great projects. So we offer knowledge and partners to contact, further education, and there will be vouchers for individual counseling for companies. So we try to support you in manifold ways, and now it means we need to roll up our sleeves and use these opportunities. Because after all, you want to make your company successful, and we all want to contribute to a future success in Baden-Württemberg also after the transformation, so that we are as strong economically as we were in the past. Thank you. Thank you for these opening words. There was a lot of information and what we can expect today, which stimulus we'll get and in which direction the discussions will lead us. I have just received a question in the chat that was the topic of synthetic fuels. Mrs. Hofmeister-Kraut already mentioned them. That is being open-minded for technologies. Baden-Württemberg also stands up for synthetic fuels. So how is that in Baden-Württemberg and in Germany overall? Heiner, it's great that we get personalized questions. Although we cannot see you, I think we have the camera between us and we work on this process together, and that's why I would like to thank Heiner Schmidt for this question. Now, on synthetic fuels, I would like to say it will be very important for us to use them and to build up the capacities to make these fuels. And it is predictable that in the future we will not only make regenerative energy in Germany and then convert them via hydrogen to a synthetic fuel, but in Germany we will continue to import energy in the form of chemical fuels. And this was quite a specific question. It was about the approval. So it's always the question on how you mix the synthetic fuel. In most projects, people assume that on the way to make the synthetic fuel, I meet the standards that I have today with the combustion engine, that I will mix in synthetic parts so that it is a blend of fuel, And for the people who are not so deep in this matter, I would like to open that up. On the topic of synthetic fuels, we have the possibility to make new fuels which were not possible based on fossil fuels, but this means we need an approval for these fuels, and these processes are ongoing. On the other hand, this also means changes in the area of combustion engines. Not so much in the trimology, but more in the components that need to be resistant against all different types of fuel. So that was now very brief, otherwise it'd be its own talk. We have taken that with us, and we want to look at the opportunities. We want to look ahead to see what can we do, how can we shape the future. And now the pressure of the changes is now rather involuntary. Especially at the beginning of the pandemic, a major topic was the supply chains. Interruption of supply chains and shutdown of factories was something that had a great impact. And that's why we said we want to cover this. And you, Robert Cameron from the VDA, volunteered to speak here today. He's the head of production and logistics department, and he is going to give us a talk, and this is called Challenges to Supply Chains Through Corona. We already talked about this. Perhaps there are some surprising insights. Thank you, Mr. Cameron. You are logged on from Berlin. We are looking forward to your presentation, and we are happy that you support us in a virtual way today at the Automotive Suppliers Day. So I pass the floor to you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Knüttgen. And thank you very much for the invitation to the Automotive Suppliers Day Baden-Württemberg. Mrs. Knüttgen already presented or introduced me. So I'm Hugh Robert Cameron, the head of production and logistics department. And I'm also at the VDA board, and it is a network of 20 different suppliers, and during the lockdown we control the communication between the automotive industry and the suppliers. And I would like to talk to you about our experiences and the conclusions we have drawn from there. And I would like to go to the next slide. The automotive industry has a worldwide network, and it was hit severely by the lockdown. You know, in the past we had several crises. In 2007 we saw a global financial crisis. In 2010 we had the volcanic ash cloud over Europe. Then in 2011 we had a nuclear disaster in Fukushima. And of course, Japan is an important market also in connection with the USA and China. But nothing was the same as what we face today, the global COVID-19 lockdown. But there is a surprising result. The supply chains have withstood. They were not interrupted. A lot of work was put in there, and many emergency processes were introduced, but the supply chains withstood. And you will see that also on the next slides of my presentations. I'm very sorry if I bore you with things that are obvious to you, but I would like to emphasize that we in the automotive industry operate worldwide. So our customers are all over the world to produce there. So it is a very wide network of supply chains. We partially produce with local partners and with partners that we have here, and that has to do with duties and tariffs, but it also has to do with quality. If you manage to quickly build up a production that can make high quality products, then that's an advantage. Of course, it also has entrepreneurial reasons. We want to ensure capacities, and we want to make sure that employees are treated well. So as I said, that is a very wide network. Of course, there are logistic processes which we continuously improve and optimize. So we make complex modules, and we have a worldwide production network where we can support each other if we face bottlenecks. This system is very efficient, and this is especially the reason why we want to maintain this network. But how do we respond to an interruption of the system? And that's what you can see on the next page. First of all, I would like to share positive news. This isn't our first rodeo. I'm an American from Texas, and it's not the first time that we face major challenges like this. And we do have processes in place with which we can guarantee the smooth operation within the supply chains. And this does not only apply to the large supply chains, but also the small ones. We have more than 12 years experience and have rescued supply chains that were under pressure many times. So if you have an event where you have 3 to 4 weeks time, then you can work with banking measures so that you build something for stock. You can change production program to make sure that we can build all the variants that we need. You can get deliveries from production network from other markets. And there is a close communication between suppliers and manufacturers to control bottlenecks and manage bottlenecks. And then also in terms of finance, we have a supplier support program. In the easiest case, this means we deliver more material than they need to make sure that the supplier remains liquid. So you see, we have taken many measures with which we can respond to these issues, and we have proven that over the last 12 years. So what is different today? That's what we see on the next slide. The COVID-19 pandemic is truly global. And that is what is the major difference to crisis from the past. The financial crisis was an American-European problem. The Fukushima accident was more on the Asian market and had a marginal impact on us. Also, the volcano ash was something that hit more Europe. And now it's the very first time that the whole world is impacted by it. And the entire supply chain had to withstand this pressure. Now, the second thing is the lockdown. A lockdown is unpredictable and it can only be mitigated to a limited extent. Nobody wanted this lockdown. And everybody said, we will do everything to prevent it, but now we have the lockdown. So this is something we have to deal with, and now we don't know how this is going to pan out. And a lockdown can be mitigated to a limited extent by fiscal or monetary policy only. Now, the consequences of the pandemic and the lockdown are dramatic. We have huge problems as the uncertainty amongst employees. In past crises, employees could continue to work. And even more people work than usual. There was a reduction of sick days. And during a lockdown, that was not the case because employees had a reason to be afraid. They didn't know whether they could get infected. And we deliberately put them at danger. So employees did not have the feeling that they can work safely. So that required a high degree of adaptation to protection measures and also process adaptations to adjust the times between supply chains. There were disruptions of cross-border work that had to be coordinated, and there was a high risk of insolvencies, especially at smaller companies and smaller supply chains. Shutdown has major effect. And that is going like a red thread through the situation in which we are right now. On the next slide, you can see how the VDA responded to this. At the beginning, I told you that I'm in the VDA logistic body. And I'm also in this body where the heads of production are represented. So with these two bodies, I sat down and we talked about the lockdown and what we can do to deal with this challenge. So how did we do it? We introduced working from home for all indirect areas to give employees a feeling of being safe. We shut down all the plants in lockdown areas. And the production network kept together to supply more things. And we made sure that we increased stock levels for critical components. We drew up clear rules and regulations. You can see two examples. One is a recommendation on how to protect against infections. And in another project, we have drawn up 5 phases how to deal with it, how to do pandemic management. And we also redesigned the workstations and supplied control centers. One important topic is that the problem was not Asia and China. The problem was Italy. During the really bad times in China, we had enough equipment and enough inventory. But Italy and Austria caused us more problems. And still the supply chain did not interrupt. And the consequence is that we don't need to redesign the supply chain. So let's go to the next slide. The global automotive supply chain is not called into question. It will remain the way it is, but we need to do specific adaptations. For example, complex modules with low stock levels were critical. And the actual problem is the same as in other industries. It's the lack of demand. If we have a low demand, we need to reduce the price to increase the demand. And the price reduction is unequal to a regionalized supply chain due to the costs. On the next slide, you can see what we are going to do. We will continue to transform workplaces and adapt them so that we meet all the hygienic measures, the distances. We will reduce just in time because it binds the capital, and that has the first priority now. And we will work on making sure that we are not as dependent. I'm afraid my time is up, and now I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron, for your presentation. We had audio problems. You were very difficult to understand over here. And unfortunately, we noticed where the boundaries or limits of such a virtual meeting are. We had the slides, though, and we basically reconstructed your presentation based on these slides. I'm looking into my question sheet, whether any questions have come up regarding your presentation. Right now, none. I believe one question is still left from a different topic, which is not directed towards you, unfortunately. Mr. Cameron, I'm sorry to say that we didn't manage to improve the sound quality. Might be the broadband network in Berlin. Maybe you have a neighbor stealing some bandwidth from you right now by streaming videos. Thank you very much for your presentation. We might be able to go into further detail later. I would also like to point out that e-mobil BW has just initiated a study on resilient supply chains, and first results have already come up. This is basically identical with what Mr. Cameron said as far as the analysis is concerned, where the bottleneck was demand reduction and costs. These are all topics that came up during the study already. And I would like to thank Mr. Cameron. Greetings to Berlin, and thank you very much for joining us today. And this topic is definitely going to be with us for the next few months. Thank you. I would now like to announce the next speaker, the next topic. We have Dr. Engelbert Wimmer with us today. He is an expert of the supplier scene, the automotive business. For 20 years, he's been consulting international automotive groups or companies, especially in questions of digitalization and leadership processes, new leadership models. He is the founder and CEO of the consulting company E&Co AG. And he studied telematics at the TU Graz and did his PhD at the University of Bremen he majored in philosophy. And an interesting mix. We are looking forward to your presentation, and I just read a quote. You said that we need to ride the black swan. I'm really looking forward to your presentation and hearing more about the black swan as a metaphor for very rare, unplanned events, positive and negative events. Corona is such a negative event with far-reaching consequences. I'm looking forward to your presentation. The topic of your presentation is an automotive world learning to cope with Corona, markets, drive systems, value adding, and players in a state of change. Thank you, Mr. Wimmer. Good morning to you all. I would like to greet all of you in front of your screens at home, so you can only hear me in a remote manner today. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you some information on the markets, the drive systems, and opportunities. That's quite an ambitious undertaking. That's why I will try to focus on a few core messages that I would like to give to you, and I would like to present them in advance so you know what's ahead of you. The first thing is because the entire sales of the vehicle industry we are quite optimistic we'll see a rebound here. So the production quantities will rise much quicker than we assume right now. We will go back to the levels we are familiar with. The bad message is we don't have the capacity utilization here in our markets, but in the markets where the vehicles will be sold, and I will also give you reasons for that. This causes an enormous cost pressure here in Germany, which you found in overhead and R&D productivity. Here we have to make significant changes, otherwise we won't be able to keep up with competition with our current automotive industry, and that will cause a relative intense dealing of the managing directors in the supply industry, but also among the manufacturers in the next few months and years to come. Before we get going, I would like to give you a short introduction. E&Co is a medium-sized consulting company. We consult and we are also entrepreneurs. So our unique selling proposition is that we have our own holding fund where we actually use the motto of skin in the game and consult companies. And I will keep this introduction short indeed, because if you see I would like you to follow me on Xing, and then I don't have to present too many details about our company right now. What's thrilling about our company is that as a consulting company, we deal with radar systems of the next generation or an online shop for vehicle distribution. That's something we also have. Startups that are actually scale-ups and have more far-reaching insight into the industry. And there's also a book I would like to point out, The Incarnation Code. On 460 pages, you will get detailed information on the thesis and thoughts I will present today. It's the central issue here. Markets drive systems, value adding and players in a state of change, and that's something that my colleague from the VDA also pointed out. COVID is just one facet of this enormous growth in volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Just to look at the figures here, in the past 60 years we had a significant global growth in vehicles, and in the mid-2010 decade we were quite surprised and also thrilled about the fact that the automotive industry had quite a stable long-term growth, approaching the 100 million vehicles, including light and commercial vehicles. And we created the capacities for that as well. So for 100 million vehicles to be produced, that wouldn't have been a problem at all. In many markets, we would still have overinvestments. But the reality is that in 2019 already we had a first drawback. We had a reduction by 4 million vehicles. More than 50% of this reduction was caused in China. And the reason is this trade war that Trump started had a massive impact in those areas where we saw the hugest growth potential, but other markets didn't keep up to what we had forecast before. This block that we always show in the charts wasn't as performant as we had thought. And in this reduction process, we were on top of that hit with the COVID crisis. And this year, we believe that we will be selling 73 million units, so 20 million units less than compared to the peak 2018. And with this industry that we have, this is a cost catastrophe. Especially in China, the sales have recovered. You heard that in the news. The proportion of new energy vehicles has massively increased. That is, of course, controlled by the fact that in China you only get registration plates if you're in this lottery, and that's a huge bottleneck. The lottery was opened and the market was brought back to its volume in a very controlled manner, and that actually took place. The market is catching up again, and what we also believe is that in other markets, the relevant demand is going to follow, and I'm going to give you a few reasons for that. The public transport is decreasing. That's a poll by Mr. Frank Ellenhorst. He made this figures available to me. Driving one's own vehicle during this COVID-19 time is, of course, decreasing. Uber is in a holding position. They are surviving with Uber Eats, which is the supply of foods, and the public transport is dropping significantly. This drop is even stronger in air traffic. It will be even more sustainable there because air traffic is not going to recover for another decade as we've forecasted. And the mileage in total is actually increasing. The vehicle-made mileage, so the numbers of kilometers per year which are driven, is increasing. The individual transport is the means of choice, and there's no propaganda, or let's not call it propaganda, but green policy is not going to change anything about that. The individual transport is going to remain strong. I'm going to come back to that later. We all believe that the GDP is going to further grow. That's the main driver for vehicle sales. We see growth rates that are still in fascinating countries such as India and in China quite enormous. And compared to here in green, you see the percentage of state stimulus packages during the financial crisis. So you see that in the times of COVID-19, we are investing much more than before. And we see that we are much more optimistic with our forecasts. It's going to go up again at some point in time, even though the second wave can be felt noticeably. Everyone is quite optimistic regarding the markets. Another important topic I would like to mention is how long do we have to work until we can actually afford a vehicle, and the long-term tendency goes down, so we need to work less in order to be able to afford a vehicle. Of course, I can't tell you all the anecdotes here, but maybe in a different place. We mainly have an effect here where the vehicle population is there's still leeway even in mature markets. This is driven by the fact that people do not just buy 1 or 2 or 3 vehicles per family, but the vehicles are driven less per year. The absolute mileage is increasing proportionally in all markets, proportionally to the GDP, so the vehicle fleet is significantly going to increase. So what we see, there is light at the end of the tunnel indeed. There will be a recovery. But here my 3 problems go again. CO2, costs, and employment are issues that are going to stay with us. And all 3 will be escalated and are just announcing the VUCA world that's approaching. CO2 is something I will have to skip over, and basically we have a reduction in the CO2 targets. This is due to the implementation of the CO2 regulations that's going to be reducing the CO2 emissions in the fleets. Customers find that the technology is quite expensive for compensation, so 10% in 2030 is quite a high number for the share of e-vehicles in the pool, but we have at least 20% in China that need to be sold there. So the rise in electric vehicles is quite immense. If we look at the mileage, and so the overall mileage in the pool per year, you can see that a lot of innovation has to be made to compensate for CO2, and that's going to be expensive. I'll just give you a quick overview. We have to reduce CO2, we need to change the mix, get more electrification, biofuels, and so on, and we need to compensate. These 3 pillars will be needed, but we'll only manage to do that if we go from the current R&D to a real R&D, because as we can see it when looking at the figures, we have 60 billion euros that we spend on R&D, and we missed all important trends of the past 20 years in the automotive industry. And so we need to really pick up speed here and move away from this mindset that I would like to do something but I don't want to change anything, and have a more effective approach. The second thing is the OPEX in general is overhead expenses are a catastrophe, and I will give you more details in a few minutes. Today, the workload seems as it is depicted here on the left. If you look at this, in the US and in Germany, the costs for labor have really gone through the roof. And this is driven by the demand-supply topic and something that is due to the market, of course. But if you look at rival markets, at their labor costs and overheads, then you don't have to just look at Korea, but other countries have joined this. Then we see something we need to work on. What does this mean to you as CEOs of SMEs? I keep watching the time, so I'm within my timeline. The first thing is we need to ride this black swan of COVID-19 and really protect that in the management levels. We have a structurization. We have a law which is being initiated. So for many companies that have received these loans from the KfW, this will affect the financial structure of many suppliers. So please have an early warning system for all managing directors so that there will not be any legal consequences for you in the end, and that you will actually benefit from the Business Stabilization and Restructuring Act, especially in the medium-sized company sector. We believe that the SMEs are going to, there will be a selection process, and we need to look at this on the owner side as well as at the management side. The second thing is massive performance is necessary. We need to ensure operational continuity. We have very lean structures, and especially in the external plants worldwide, these lean structures need to be transferred to your own house, basically. And you have to have agile overheads so that they can actually adjust to the situation. If a competitor goes out of the market, you need to be able to take over this production volume overnight and get these economies of scale, because the shakeout from this restructuration package that's coming up will only be noticeable in the first quarter of next year, when these insolvency have to be filed. The third thing is to have clear prioritizations. What are our core businesses? What can we actually get rid of, and what do we want to get rid of on the other side? And make sure that you have a shell model where you can just peel off layers, basically. And of course, a change in perspective is important. Ask yourself, what is your midterm strategy? What is the innovation? So that it's a core business. And at which level, and that's something I am talking about in my book, at which level of the organization do we have to look at economies of scale and innovations? Where do we have to split these topics? In the field of mobility services is something I have with the shareholders. That's what Daimler did. They did mobility, trucks, and passenger cars. Or is it further down where we have innovations, and I reconcile both? I see our industry at a crossroads, and the special thing is that at the same time we will have to go into 4 different directions. We have to look at lean practice, manage that. Lean is only possible if we have the digital conditions for that, to get information from the production plants. And then IoT is a buzzword here. We also have to deal with CapEx. R&D productivity is an important factor here. We have to become clearly more flexible, and we have to ask the questions, what is our mission for the next decade? And this brings me to the end of my 15-minute presentation on spot, and I'm looking forward to the questions that come up. Thank you, Mr. Wimmer. That was Mr. Wimmer. There was a question from the pool, whether you can show us the name of the speaker, and why don't you look at the agenda again? You find it on the website. Let's look into the chat. There was also a notice that your microphone is chafing against your beard. I guess it's less relevant. And there was also a question that came up, a criticism regarding your metaphor. Someone said COVID is not a black swan, unfortunately without further explanation, but opinions seem to go apart here. Additional questions didn't come up, so please, if you still have a question, be brave and address it to us. It was a very structured presentation. The fact was quite a fact-based analysis of the different causes. And I have a question here. What are you talking about? What do you mean by R&D productivity? Could you further explain what you mean? Where is the potential for reducing the capex? Well, this R&D driven aspect, well, what's the reason for that? We have very large system relevant suppliers, and I would call them system relevant. They managed to have a substantial R&D rate in the past few years and diversified with that. They have a very solid position and have been able to get price positions through with the OEMs because they were leaders in their field. But on the other hand, in the global markets, we have a fast forward, such in Korea as in Japan, and they managed to do everything in much shorter time. They didn't have to have the basic research. So the time to market with these colleagues was much shorter, so that the R&D share just went through the roof. We have companies such as Bosch, for example. They have a very high R&D rate, so they have a proper positioning. But we also have groups such as the Volkswagen Group. They have gigantic R&D expenses and compete with Hyundai, only having 1/3 of those. So over the long run, if you compare these different groups, this is only justifiable if you have a return on innovation. So you need to increase the R&D efficiency, look at the absolute cost rate to see whether it's correct. But is my time to market correct is even more essential. I have a few customer projects where we have a strategic targets. We have a time to market or PEP with 12 months. So the software is decoupled from the hardware, and coupling the software back into the product creation process, that radically changes the R&D rate. And at the same time, we need to split it from the values which are really important. That's rate for R&D expenses, which only reflects pseudo activities, and really split this from these innovation aspects. Having special separate companies, that's something that the owner needs to define. And there's no right or wrong here, just right or wrong in the short run. And managing this is something which will be decisive for our future. And given the even ever quicker cycles, this is something which is very important. And those of you who don't think digitalization is happening, we will not find synergies. Another question from the chat. Looking at Europe, why is Europe not benefiting from this recovery? Mr. Schmeck cannot relate to that. That's a question that I would have asked as well, but I didn't quite get the link directly. Well, because in the past few years, this obligation to localize your production also leads to an increase of local content. And this disenfranchising of the globalization causes a stronger localization. And with this localization, the retransfer of profit margins is reduced. The retransfer to Europe. So this retransfer to Europe is under pressure. The ability to invest and the willingness of this investor community in Europe to invest is reduced, and we have to be clear of the fact that we have overcapacities in Europe, significant overcapacities. So if we don't see players exit this market, then we might see consolidations of Fiat, PSA and Opel. We will see plants that we'll be losing, and the pie doesn't get bigger, but it's going to be reduced in size. Thank you very much for this analytical view. Your motto is being realistic, do not make too many promises. And there's one more question. Can you give more details on the shift of the production from Europe to Asia? I guess that's the same direction. We can summarize that with the other answer. And another question coming up regarding capacity to act. What is the entrepreneurial spirit we need? I would say hands-on, but not too shy. What is the professional response to that? A bon mot from my book. Culture is not an input, but an output of leadership. So clear leadership that actually makes it possible for you to be courageous enough to say where you want to head to, a reasonable dealings with your social partners. Of course, we don't want to ruin what we have built up, but we need to be honest in what is actually required to remain competitive overall. And also innovation that needs to be tackled. How can, in our organization succeed so that new things will succeed? And you also need to have an honest analysis of what happened with the money that was spent on R&D in the past 10 years, how this can be improved. I don't want to tell you you need to reduce your R&D investment, but you need to increase the output, the yield. Thanks very much for your wise words. We will see you during the panel discussion later on. Thank you very much for your presentation. We will continue our disinfectant phase before I can welcome my next speaker.
Mrs. Jana Hofmann, she is the head of electromobility and chief engineer electromobility of the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. She is a member of the core team Southwest Electromobility Cluster, and she is going to talk about Fit for E, using existing competencies in electromobility. How can I transfer them to growing markets like the electromobility? Where do we see the opportunities? And I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much for your introduction. As announced, I would like to introduce our Fit for E project and how we as the Institute can support this way going into electromobility by remembering our strengths, and that's what we looked into. And this is my background. We are the WBK Institute for Production Science. We work across the whole chain from manufacturing and material technology, machines and production systems. That is Professor Dr. Lanza's chair. And I'm head of electromobility, which is cross-connected across these three chairs. And we have created this guideline Fit for E. So how did we get to the idea to develop a guideline like this? Within the research project Transformation of e-mobility in Baden-Württemberg, and we identified three different directions and how we can rethink the battery development and how we can shape that in the future. And then we have manufacturing, where we want to show how training can be shaped. And in the middle we have our lighthouse project, that's the project Fit for E, and I would like to focus on this today. So how do we get to this? This is a classic supply chain from the last years. You see the combustion engine, there is an OEM who sells the car, then there's the tier 1, for example, for the injection system, and tier 2, and another tier 1, for example, for gaskets. All these three suppliers need a plant or machine that makes these partial system, this subsystem. And for this, we need the plant engineers. And we have environmental awareness, we have tax incentives, and they lead to the fact that e-mobility comes more in the market and creates a tech pull. And by Fit for E, we want to empower these people to get into it by understanding materials, processes, manufacturing, and assembly, and to understand these new products. So how does it work when you shape Fit for E together with us? We have three phases. First phase is matching, phase 2 is knowledge bases, and at the end there is an interactive workshop, and we look at what empowers the company to go into this technology push. So I would like to start with the matching phase. And for this purpose, I want to show you how we approach and how competencies can be transferred. These are classic production processes to make a combustion engine. On the right-hand side, you can see two pictures from the battery manufacturing, and there is a rotor with an electric motor. Now, the question is, how can we transfer the competencies that we have from the manufacturing of combustion engines and transfer them to these two new products like battery and electric motor? We are engineers, and that's why we approached in the classical way of engineers. Everybody who works in this sector understands it. So we looked at all the different manufacturing processes that are described, which ones can we take over, and how can we take the ones that we can handle well and bring them into the others. And the example here is punching, winding, and external grinding. Then we put it into a database and detailed it to the third subgroup, and we identified alternative routes in morphological boxes. And then we created a questionnaire which makes it possible for the company to show which manufacturing processes the company can handle already. And this tool, together with the questionnaire, is the basis to go into the matching tool. I can give you an example. For the company called Musterfirma, we want to show which existing competencies they have already in metal machining. On the right-hand side, you can see it's a turning, drilling, milling, and these are the entries in the database, and we start comparing that with the manufacturing of an electric motor. So here you see the rotor shaft. There are requirements in terms of lightweight, engineering, and concentricity, and this is because an electric motor doesn't have the same requirements as a classic combustion engine. The electric motor is less noisy because there is no more gearbox. And all this has been considered in our database. And here you can see a morphological box, as I described earlier on. On the left-hand side, you see the different process steps to make the shaft. And on the right-hand side, you see different production procedures that you use, for example, trimming. And all these names are from the standard DIN 8580. So there's a clear definition about these processes. So we can go different paths, path 1, path 2, path 3, and look into this to show this process of the manufacturing of the rotor shaft. Sometimes you can skip a process step because you have the condition that it is not necessary to have a modular layout, and then it just says 0 so that the database can deliver an output. Here you can see it matched with the competencies of the company. Green means we can handle this process, or I'm at least in the same subgroup with the group where I'm good at and what I need to make the electric motor. The yellow paths are the ones where I'm in the same group, not subgroup, but group. And difficult it becomes with the red parts. These are production processes that I cannot handle yet in my company, but I need them to start making electric motors. Then we look for the path in the database that matches best, where you have the most green or at least yellow path, so that you can select this path and say there are only a few steps to go before you can start making a rotor shaft, for example. So what do we do with it? This is the result we show as an output. For example, in this spider diagram where we show, okay, what am I good at already and what do I have to learn to take the last steps to be a manufacturer for rotor shafts for electric motors. So these are the results that we get out of our matchmaking. Together with our partner companies, we discuss those in our workshops. Okay, how do we run a workshop? First of all, we start with a knowledge base. We realize that very often it is the case that the way into electromobility is perceived as a very complex way, because people don't know which products are in question and which process steps are necessary. I have to go back one slide. Could I see the last one? Here you can see what we're very good at a university. We're good at giving lectures, and we reduced our lecture to match the demand of companies and not so much the demand of students who have to write an exam, but for companies. So we teach how these new products work and what the production steps are behind them. And when we run the workshops, very often it turns out that the companies say, oh, we can do that already. But we haven't done it yet. So, of course, there are new requirements and new challenges, but overall, most competencies are already there. And it's just about daring to jump into a new product. So we look at battery modules and electric motors. How does it work? How is it built up? And what's the process chain behind it? Then we start the workshop. Here you can see how this works. So with our matchmaking tool, we show companies where we can see their competencies, and the company also rates where they see themselves. Many companies already have a target image, and together we can decide within the workshop what is still missing and how we can do it, how we can achieve it. And here I would like to thank the cluster of Southwest Electromobility. We were allowed to work with 2 companies from the cluster, and they were our guinea pigs, and they gave us a lot of feedback how we can improve the process. So from more than 30 processes, we went through process chain posters, and we coordinated where we are now and how we can match it, and we agreed upon less than 3 processes, and via our guideline and moderators we agreed upon 1 process, and we worked through it in a SWOT analysis, and the company themselves, they had the feeling that they can do it. We don't want to tell them how to do it, but we want to show them that they have all the tools already for example, to trim the shaft of a rotor, or we want to also show them how the existing sales structures are in place, and together we can then reach a result. And our result is a guideline which we developed in the strategy dialogue. You can download it for free on our website, and there's also a printed version that you can get through e-mobil. And I would like to conclude with these words, and I would like to do a bit of advertisement for us. We can offer this guideline, and Professor Jürgen Fleischer, he's one of the experts for transformation in the area of plant and equipment engineering. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present this project here today. Thank you, Mrs. Hofmann. I have already received very good feedback. Mr. Eckstein from Nukus GmbH says, that's a great project. Can we use the database, and can it be extended for further testing procedures? Perhaps you can tell us a couple of words about it. Yes, at present, the database is with us, but everybody can follow this procedure. And for this purpose, we made the guideline, and if you then trust in us, please approach us. Partially, some testing procedures are included, but not all of them comprehensively, because there are so many different possibilities to do testing. You need to measure the quality, so we integrated it, but whether you go through testing procedure A, B, or C is something that is company-specific, and that's why it wouldn't be the right place to put it in the guideline. Thank you very much. And I think it's important that it's important to say that it's also part of the Landeslotsenstelle. So just have a look at it, contact us at e-mobil, and we can establish a contact. So we won't leave you alone. Another question. Does a company need to fulfill certain prerequisites to join Fit4E? No. Everybody who wants to make products and who is dealing with plant and equipment machining, no prerequisites. And the question from Spain, from Valencia. How long did that project take, and how many companies were involved? The project took 1.5 years, and test customers whose feedback went into the guideline were 2 companies, Erdrich and Zufriener. And since then, we have done it with a number of companies who were not part of the research project. But since the project was concluded, we continued that with the guideline, and these 2 companies were actively involved in making the guideline. So this is to say it has been validated through the proof of concept. Yes. Another question. Which resources are necessary from the company side? So how many people are involved? How many contact persons do you need for this project? Resources are time and people. We need 1 day at least, and we need employees from all different positions of a company. So it's not enough to have only the CEO, but we need people from production. But it's also not enough to have people only from production, but you also need it from project control. So the company needs to be mirrored. And in terms of time, we need 1 to 2 days. Thank you very much. I think that is quite helpful. And it also showed that this is a relevant project, and it meets interest of companies. So have a look at it, and information on the Landeslotsenstelle is on the website of the Automotive Suppliers Day. And there is also information on the technology calendar, which might be of interest to you, because many different technologies are described there, and perhaps you can already see where you are positioned right now and how you can go ahead and how you can use Fit for E. Mrs. Hofmann, thank you very much for this presentation. We'll stay in touch, and now we'll disinfect the stage for the next speaker. Our next guest is Dr. Jochen Weihrauch, CEO of the Dürr Systems AG, and he's going to talk about global positioning of mechanical and plant engineering in times of corona and structural change.
Yes, Mr. Weihrauch, you're the guy from practice, basically, who is facing the storm right now, but you're standing on solid ground. And you can tell us how it is right now to deal with these topics from the perspective of a company, not from the consulting company's point of view, but from the company where decisions are taken, where you have to deal with these topics. We're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much. The floor is yours. Thank you, Ms. Knüttgen, for these kind words of introduction. Yes, it's a quite thrilling environment right now. I'm going to give you a few insights into a global SME's supplier company facing up to the structural change. And it's kind of odd comparing Corona to, or the COVID-19 pandemic to structural change, because one thing has just come up, the other one has been with us for quite a while. And at the same time, I will try to show you that there are relations between the two. Maybe in advance, a few words regarding our company. Dürr is a global company with 3.9 billion turnover. We have 16,200 employees, and we have 3 subsidiaries. We have the traditional Dürr company, then Schenk, and Homag AG, which is mainly in the woodworking industry. I would now like to focus on Dürr Systems. It's a subsidiary which is accounting for half of the overall turnover. We have 7,000 employees in 54 locations worldwide. For many years, we have been globally present. Our member of the Supervisory Council of Honor already founded this subsidiary in Brazil in 1960. Shortly after that, we had Mexico. In the 70s, we expanded to the US. And since the 80s, we have our own company in China on site. So we started early on putting into practice what pays off for us as a company, having a worldwide presence with automotive clients on site. We have 70 service antennas on site, and we support production on a daily basis. Half of the paint shop systems and final assembly lines worldwide have technologies from Dürr, at the least, if not entire plants that we have built up. So what are our main areas of focus? We have the product creation process, the complete one, starting with the body shop and adhesion technology, and also in electric mobility, cell manufacturing, battery manufacturing. We are also present in paint shops. We're building complete paint shop systems and just as complete final assembly lines for our customers. What are the drivers of the past few years who have moved us basically even before the COVID-19 pandemic, and which we won't be changed by this pandemic but just reinforced? One topic is electric mobility. We've heard this already today. We have become quite active early on in our cooperation with the electric mobility suppliers. These are the parts and production that we deliver. They're not clearly really different. The paint shop systems, for example, that's basically the same as with traditional combustion vehicles. But the customers are different. The new electric mobility manufacturers that you see in China, or the Californian manufacturer who's quite active in Germany as well, they have different requirements in our support, in our cooperation than the traditional automotive suppliers or OEMs. And we have catered to their needs early on. Then the next one is digitalization. We are quite active in this topic. We know what it means and what it can actually accomplish. We are active in many vehicle plants with artificial intelligence by, for instance, having or substituting traditional maintenance plans with analysis tools that can actually monitor the status of individual systems and make maintenance suggestions early on, so the customers can deal with that early on. The third pillar is sustainability. This is something that we address with great intensity, not as a defensive instrument to cater to the capital markets, but to make it our own business model. We offer solutions to our customers so they can actually clearly reduce CO2 emissions and can reduce consumption in their plants. These are the three main pillars, the factors that have driven us, and these factors have been accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic but haven't changed. If you look at the funding programs by the federal government, they are tailored to electric mobility, sustainability, and also digitalization. And if you look at our business figures, this is also reflected. We are not resistant to the pandemic. In the first half year, we had 23% less incoming orders. But this is basically in line with the other mechanical and plant engineers in the automotive industry. From our communication with other companies, we noticed that others have been even hit harder by this and are more under pressure. The reason for this is that we have been quite successful in China. In a year where the pandemic started in China, our incoming orders in the first half year rose by 61% compared to the past year. But you can also see that the development in Europe and in the Americas and the rest of the world, rest of Asia, hits us quite hard. But in total, we have stood quite strong here, and this will also be confirmed by the Q3 figures, which we'll be announcing to the markets today. How do we stand up to these structural changes that has hit us in the past few years? Well, I already announced that we have quite a global approach. We have global system centers. These are units that have the full competence of making business. It's in Dürr Systems, it's mainly Germany, but they're at eye level with China right now. And in these axes, Germany and China, we have actually attributed the other countries so that in this globalizing countries, which actually brings localization with it, we can still respond. There's a lot of topics that are drivers here, not only COVID, but other trade barriers that have been set up. We have to see how this continues after the US elections. And we have been facing these issues early on with units that can actually respond within the companies and to do business on their own. To give you more details, China, here we have pictures from our new location. Since the mid-80s, we've been active in China. We have in 2012, then in 2013, we had a new construction. Another big Shanghai location was opened in 2016. And you see in the graph below how turnover and the workforce have developed. If you count all employees, we have more than 3,000 employees in Shanghai alone. This is correct because that's the way we can keep up with the requirements on site. On the right-hand side, you see the brands that we're active with today. And this helps us to stand up to the pandemic because we are only depending on very few experts. Otherwise, we can do local business. Shanghai Volkswagen, for example, there's a construction site we're on right now. We had more than 1,000 employees in peak times at these construction sites, and you cannot guarantee this on an international level. You have to provide the competencies and the capacities on site. This is a slide that is supposed to show our business with electric mobility suppliers. Here, half-year figures. You might not have never heard Evergrande, but it's one of the largest e-mobility suppliers or manufacturers in China. And you see, it's our largest customer by far in the first half year, and the traditional manufacturers are clearly behind. They can't keep up with that. That's a picture we wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago. And that's our current situation. And we are happy that we have entered the global markets, especially in China, and have this position in the market because it actually supports our business significantly. As you can see, electric mobility from incoming orders, and these are pure electric mobility manufacturers, 1/3 of our incoming orders. I had already pointed out how we act. We have global system centers. We have 3 pillars based on our global business strategy. We also have a best cost country approach. Here, we always look at our value chains and try to find the best performance for good costs. You see this looking at the examples of Poland and India. Here we have set up locations. In Poland, the workforce has almost been doubled, and in India, it has been clearly increased as well. So you just need to face this fact that within Europe we have a high cost span regarding overheads, especially direct costs are something, direct overheads are something that force us to find more favorable cost bases elsewhere in Europe. The third pillar here is the global production and purchasing network. In our worldwide locations, we have our own production as well that we use for global supplies. That's a huge challenge at the moment because if you want to send an employee to China, he needs to go into quarantine first for 2 weeks, and the same applies when he flies back. So it's not possible to approach many locations from outside right now, such as South Africa last week. They decided that they wouldn't let any German employees in. These are issues we have to face at the moment. But still, the 3 pillars are intact. Mr. Cameron talked about the supply chains, which are still intact, and our 3 pillars here are also intact. But they live from the fact that we have a lot of local competence and capacity in the individual markets in order to drive our business with the customers. To conclude, I would like to give you an estimate. What are our assumptions? Well, I don't have quite the same optimistic point of view as Mr. Wimmer regarding the recovery of production figures. You can see that we base our forecast on the figures from LMC. They assume that 2019 will be, the figures of 2019 will just be reached in 2022. To us as plant engineer suppliers, this means that the customers will start gearing up their capacities in the year 23-24 to full capacity. And then they will start making bigger investments in Europe. So China is still ahead. investments are made there. And here I agree with Mr. Wimmer. In Europe, we see a long term where automotive manufacturers will invest in electric mobility, autonomous driving, and there will be less investment in other domains. The main focus will be on Asia and China, and in the Americas we'll have to see what's ahead. The driver is still electric mobility, digitalization and sustainability, as I have described in the beginning, and I am convinced as a supplier in the automotive industry, we have to have a global position. This means locally in the markets and mainly strong and you have to be strong and independent, because you cannot rely on having employees or having goods being delivered worldwide in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation and your insight into the world of facts. What are the real figures? Where do we see growth? Where do we see opportunities? And your strategic insight. A few questions have come up in the chat. A very specific question regarding China, where you have a stronghold. Ms. Anna Malis asks, how do you assess your market potential in the west of China, for example, in the province of Sichuan? Well, in Sichuan, there are a few projects. Now let me think whether it's the Xpeng who's investing, but there are projects in Sichuan. This is also part of the new 5-year plan, that the region will be further developed, and when the Chinese know one thing, then it's keeping up with their plans. So I believe that a lot is going to happen there. Today, we are mainly represented in the region of Shanghai, customers in the south, but also in the north, Shenyang and Changchun, with the prospect of having more activities in the west. Yes, that's not us who decide this, but our customers. But you have an eye on it, yes. Another question.
In dem Bestand des Kostengefälles in Europa in zu heute ähnlichen Dimensionen?
Did you understand the question? No, I didn't actually. I thought it would help when I read it out aloud, but maybe I can summarize it this way. You talked about best cost countries, especially Poland. You also have the entrepreneur's perspective. We always have the location perspective. We always look at Baden-Württemberg and where we're heading. Do you also see this best cost country position, that this will be that the wages in Poland are going to go up, for example, or in the Southeast European countries, that there will be a pressure upwards, so that there will be a leveling in some time? Or do you think, how long will these best cost countries keep their advantages? Well, I believe that I will definitely be retired by the time this happens. Maybe not you, but if you just look at the costs, compare Poland to Germany, look at the traditional hourly wage rate in engineering, it's 80 euros in Germany, and in Poland it's 20 euros. So a lot needs to happen until we have level play here. And we will not be able to resolve this. We can only resolve it with innovations, efficiency, and knowledge, but we will not be able to resolve it with costs. Yes, we have to remain competitive on the cost side, get more competitive in Germany, but we will not be able to catch up with the wages we see in Eastern Europe. And Poland is not even the cheapest location. That's why I deliberately talked about best cost countries and not low cost countries, because we always compare the actual performance, the capacities, competence, training and culture in the locations, not only the naked labor costs. So it's a systemic view. The question is more specific now, but it's basically what we discussed. The wage pressure will still remain in place. What are the opportunities for direct current in production? Because it's a leverage parameter for saving energy. I guess sustainability is also something you talk about when looking at your systems. Yes, we are working on a specific project. The universities of Stuttgart and Karlsruhe have been actively working on this topic. In the plant supply and plant control, we see approaches of sustainability and recovery, regeneration. That's basically what we're talking about when we talk about direct current, and we are actively involved in 2 projects as well. So something which is actually tackled, and I will look back at my questions here in the chat. I guess you already responded to the fact why we don't have any alternatives to the best cost solution. I guess you gave a good response why this best cost strategy is best for you. Another question regarding the location of Baden-Württemberg. You showed us where we have to look at the regionalization of locations worldwide. What does this mean as a consequence for the location of Baden-Württemberg? The cost pressure is there. You pointed that out, but what are the forecasts on the employment side? What's your forecast? Well, we will not see any increases in personnel here. We announced, as many other companies, that our capacities in Germany and in Europe as a whole will be adjusted. So I can only hope that with our overall success on a global level, we will be able to secure jobs here in the state of Baden-Württemberg and in the country of Germany. Thank you very much for your statement and your estimates. Let's keep it at this. Thank you very much for your time, for giving us insights into your group and your strategy. And I would now like to announce a break. We'll have a 10-minute break before we start again with our panel discussion. And we'll see each other again in 10 minutes' time, talking about business development after the transformation. How will suppliers earn their money in the future? And I would like to welcome Mr. Wimmer here on the stage with his colleague Hans-Peter Becker from E&Co AG, Kai Burmeister from the IG Metall, who is going to give us the perspective of the employees. And we will be welcoming again Mr. Cameron virtually from the VDA with the OEM perspective. And we will also be welcoming Franz Logan from e-mobil. Many of you know him already. I am looking forward to seeing you again here in 10 minutes' time. And get some coffee, some snacks. See you soon.
A warm welcome back here at the Automotive Suppliers Day Baden-Württemberg 2020. We have met now here in the panel discussion. You have heard some of the speakers this morning, but I'll introduce them all again. To my left, Kai Burmeister from the IG Metall in Baden-Württemberg. Then I would like to welcome his new in the round is Hans-Peter Becker. He is the colleague of Mr. Wimmer, whom we've heard earlier on, and he is enriching our round now. And I would like to welcome also Mr. Cameron, logged on from Berlin, hopefully with a better sound. We've tested it in the meantime. Then Mr. Wimmer from E&Co AG and, of course, Franz Logan from e-mobil, Baden-Württemberg. I would like to start right away. We are looking into business development after the transformation. How will suppliers make money in the future? So what does the transformation mean specifically for suppliers? Where do we need to catch up? And perhaps you can give us some examples to illustrate it. I think that is interesting for the people representing the companies in front of the screens. Thank you very much. Well, when we talk about transformation, or when you talk to me about transformation, we always talk about the digital transformation. And, well, what does this mean, especially now for the suppliers? Well, Jonathan Franzen said this morning, with regard to the US elections, he said he wants to be surprised. And what I'm observing is that the major part of the suppliers have worked on the digital transformation in the last decade, so they have shown us some process innovation and also innovation in the products. But it was strongly driven by the OEMs who told them what they would like to have. And they lacked in generating the major innovations. This is also because the OEMs were under massive cost pressure. Mr. Engelbert talked about this morning. He talked about the catastrophe in efficiency, and that is also what I would like to state. It doesn't mean that they are excellent engineers, especially in Germany and also in this excellence cluster of suppliers and OEMs, of universities, of engineering service providers. They are good at what they're doing, but they only do it when you tell them what they are supposed to do. Of course, that's a bit provocating. So there are three different ways when you look at digitalization where you should be aware of that you should favor one of the paths. We have seen a lot of success. There is still a lot of potential, and the volumes of business allow us to be successful also in the future. Now, the second path is more difficult because it is also linked to higher investments, and this is the promise to be a system provider. Imagine all over the world there are 90 million cars are made, and only a small part of OEMs are ahead in terms of innovation, that they have the competency in-house. That's of course Tesla and the German premium manufacturers, but many of the car manufacturers are not in the position to do that, and we need solutions for them for partially automotive autonomous driving. And in my point of view, the large suppliers from Europe are in demand to offer a package of solutions, because that would also lead to the fact that we have the margins again. Of course, everybody claims to do that, but I see that critically. And the third path, and that is even more interesting and thrilling, there is so much in terms of underwear that digitalization needs. That's what you don't see. All the business with data. And here I don't see a great commitment from our suppliers. Since 2018, we have the 5G AA, and none of the suppliers were amongst the founders. When it was on sale here through Nokia, then who grabbed it? It was the Automotive industry and not one of the big suppliers. Of course, with 2 times 5%, Conti and Bosch got into the business, but it took a few years, and well, that's the reasonable approach. And I think we could do more to be well positioned in this infrastructural business. Well, this was about catching up. Could you share some positive examples as well? Well, the second point, and I think that is what suppliers are interested in. It was a good example, perhaps there is a lack of courage, but aren't there any examples where people have a good nose for these new businesses? Well, of course, there are so many noses, and there are always very smart heads and also courageous heads. What I realized is that over the last few years, Aptiv they have been very engaged. They said, okay, combustion technology is not what we want to make our money with in the future. So they split on the shareholder level, and they consistently pursue digitalization and the product idea. And that's incredibly difficult, of course, that's out of question. But they have defined the direction. They invest into R&D, and they try to do something where I can see that they understood signs of times. So it's something that you have to do now and not in 2 years from now. So that is something I saw as a positive example. Then we go to Mr. Burmeister. I think you hear the voice of works councils. Perhaps they complain that the suppliers where they work run the traditional models, and these people might want to see that something is happening that is safeguarding their jobs for the future. So what is your experience? And what are the examples you can share from your everyday life? Thank you, Mrs. Knüttgen. Well, we have more than 1,000 suppliers in Baden-Württemberg, according to the figures. And as versatile is the landscape of suppliers. Unfortunately, we still have suppliers who are very skeptical and reluctant, waiting, and they are saying, well, you said it already 10 years ago that electromobility will come up, but where is it now? And that is concerning us because it shows us the attitude that people think everything remains as it is. However, that will not be the case, and that's why we want to trigger discussions on what are the products and the services for the future value chain in the automotive sector. And we have to ask these questions as the IG Metro and as works councils. We ask people, how do you want to be positioned in the future? And that is something that should not only be happening in the headquarters of companies, but also at the very small locations that we have in Baden-Württemberg. We have to clarify what the future products will be. And here we have a negative image because we see that we are a bit too slow and not as close to the market as we should be. The other thing we can observe is that companies have recognized what will change. There are also good examples. And now we have to ask the question, where is this going to be localized? And I believe that with the strategy dialogue and the formats in Baden-Württemberg, we pursue a common goal. So works councils and politics say, okay, we have to transform this business in Baden-Württemberg. How can we make sure that we have enough jobs and good working conditions for the future? And we can succeed when we face this challenge in Baden-Württemberg. Unfortunately, there are also parties who want to use this transformation as an excuse to turn their back on us and leave Baden-Württemberg. And what we also see is that the red pen comes out first to cut jobs. And today I'm here to promote that we need a transformation together with the staff and never against it. Otherwise, we'll lose the basis for our welfare. So this is where we need to work on. We need to identify new business fields and take the staff along. And that is a good point to pass the floor to Franz Logan. How can we create perspectives for employees and for jobs? How can we qualify our staff? And that is a topic that we have tapped with Transformation Knowledge Baden-Württemberg. That's also a topic from the strategy dialogue. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more about it. Well, it is important that we manage to get across things that we describe. And as Kai Burmeister said, that we get it across to the individuals. And of course, an individual experiences that they were successful over many years in a specific area, let's say the workplace in manufacturing of combustion engines. Now we will experience that we will continue to build combustion engines and we will need highly skilled staff. And of course, that requires continuous training. But at the same time, the quantity of combustion engines goes down. And at other places, we need to build up skills and knowledge. So I would say it's a three-phase model. We will need employees, and we will have employees who will finish their professional life also staying with combustion engines. But we will also see people who will change from the combustion engines to electric motors or fuel cells. And thirdly, we will have people who have an entirely new training. For example, they will do software applications, which we need to apply software, for example, to lift windows up and down, or in the control systems of the car. And so there are three different ways, and what is vital is that we support these people. Of course, that requires training courses, and companies have a lot of responsibility, but there are also other institutions who offer training courses. And what do we do specifically? We have built up Transformation Knowledge BW, Transformationswissen Baden-Württemberg. And this is an incredibly large knowledge database. Parallel to this, we offer many different training courses that are not only given by us, but by important partners, companies, training institutions, trade unions. So all this is listed and can be used for companies and for employees. So transformation has to do with the fact of me wanting to get this new knowledge and breaking it down into new steps. And partially this needs to be supported and partially it depends on the initiative of the individuals. Thank you. I just received the signal that we also got questions. My colleague Saskia Drexel is looking into the iPad and gets the questions from the chat. So please use the possibility to pose your questions. Yes, one question into the round. Can we see a stronger shift of added value to Asia due to the transformation? Perhaps this is a question that goes to Mr. Cameron from VDA with a perspective to international markets, if you like. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear you. We don't see a major shift towards Asia. We have specific components which come from Asia. These are, for example, battery cells that are coming to a large part from Asia. There is a discussion about setting up battery production in Europe, but the general trend is that we build the battery pack, and that also has a large share of added value in Europe.
So currently you don't see any large tendencies. I would continue with you now, because we just talked about suppliers, and this cost pressure is something that many people care about. Mr. Wimmer already mentioned it in his presentation. The business development after the transformation. What is your outlook? How do you see cost strategies? Maybe we can go back to your presentation this morning. How will this cost pressure affect suppliers, and what's the impact on the business development after transformation? Of course, the cost pressure is addressed to the suppliers, and it's going to be rising even further. The background is not that the OEMs want to do that, but the background is that we have a demand problem at the moment. And we need to comply with certain sales boosting measures, and that goes through the entire value chain. And this affects OEMs and also suppliers, where we have to have high investments into R&D, and that within the company we have cross subsidies. That's why certain means need to be released. So they just pass it through, basically. Exactly. Mr. Wimmer, this is identical with your analysis. What are the possibilities suppliers have in dealing with this in their business models? Sorry, there's no sound. There's no sound, no audio sound. So now, all right, can you hear me now? Yes. So I would like to give you a more comprehensive response and describe the basic vectors here. The first vector, and it's very courageous to think about what mobility actually means from the system. It doesn't mean to drive people around, but and then if you look at the 10-year horizon, that things or goods are driven to people. We need to look at robotics and look at how supplies of rural areas, or maybe a country where you need to ensure mobility in thinner populated areas through robotics so that you can actually get services there. That's an entrepreneurial task that actually transforms substantially. The second thing is we need to think about which quality vehicles have that drive autonomously. Maybe they have a mileage of 150 and to 200,000 kilometers instead of 15,000 kilometers per year. So the total per year allows me to make much more, a higher investment sum to be put into this vehicle regarding electromechanics and electronics. So it's unimaginable right now. Next vector, if I look at the joint systems where you have intermodal aspects, you can park vehicles automatically and have a cross-functional mobility system. And then, of course, we have to talk about ecosystems. What do I do when I'm mobile? So you need to shape the digital experience, a real experience in an ecosystem. These are all far-fetched thoughts, but in 10 years' time, these will be the realities we'll be facing. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and companies need creators, and I'm missing these impulses in our current system. We always talk about a prototype implementation. You have a self-driving vehicle that you send off between terminals. but you need also cojones. I'll just leave it at that, yes. We need more view. Where do I find myself? Leave your traditional business models because it only gives you limited options. You need to extend your viewing field. And that's something that's very important. I'm also extending my viewing field to Saskia right now. And is there a question from the chat? Yes, there is another question. We will stick to international topics. Mr. Schmeck from Concentric GmbH is asking, China is investing more and more in Europe, which is probably due to the higher labor costs in China. Do we now have to have such a grim outlook for Baden-Württemberg and the EU? Who feels entitled to respond? Mr. Burmeister. Yes, I don't think that Mr. Logan first, then Mr. Burmeister. I don't think that the perspective is a question, but the opposite. All in all, when you're coming from a strong position, which we have at the moment, not only the strength of companies and staff, but also the strength of research, is it then possible to reach for the future? If I work on these obstacles, and those companies who work on that quicker, they will get the market. So I believe we have to name the obstacles. Everything is getting quicker, and we shouldn't be afraid of risks. That really strengthens us and reflects our mindset. An important question with a view to China regarding exports. We have a competition which is getting ever harsher on the global level, but still, because of tariffs and so on, we have focuses on Asia, North America, USA, and Europe. And the Dürr presentation showed us the meaning. When companies are actually set up in different locations with all their strength, this will help us to tackle the situation and be on the right track to name these things that will help us to succeed in a transformed mobility world. Mr. Burmeister, yes, I would like to add to that. Of course, China is not sleeping and California is not sleeping either. But we are, the state of Baden-Württemberg, we are in a higher league. We're playing Champions League here with our mobility. And I would see this as an opportunity both for the location and for the companies to approach the most climate-friendly type of mobility. Of course, the mobility systems as such is going to change, and we need to accept that and actually tap the opportunities that we have with the engineering spirit here in Baden-Württemberg, and that actually tells me that we have the potential to do that. I'm worried about what the VDI published yesterday, that the unemployment among young engineers is on the rise. And so I asked myself, are they really putting on the brakes right now during this COVID-19 pandemic? First we had this lack in skilled workers, and now they do not want to have these young people coming from universities. It's absurd for our country and for our opportunities, and that's why we need to have this outlook. That's why we need to discuss this, and I really care about our employment here in Baden-Württemberg, and I'm not shy to discuss this, how China and the US are positioned. We can do this in a very self-confident position. Please allow me to intervene here. Yes, I do have this optimism, but then we also have to address this blueprint problem. We're not designing this in a vacuum, but per base model vehicle which is sold, and if at a value of 25,000 euros, we need to pay 8,000 euros in tax. So we have the sixfold of what the entire margin is or return is. That's the tax burden. We have a labor cost rate which is included in here, which is quite high. And with the rest, it's difficult to create the future, shape the future. And we talked about this before. How can we do this jointly? That's important, but we need to be fact-oriented, accentuated, and with hard facts. That's a very fascinating dialogue we need to surge now. Because we don't want to be in a situation where we have these protests in the streets, the Yellow Vest demonstrations, because of these 800,000 directly employed people. From our point of view, 200,000 will be cut, these jobs, after this transformation phase. That's the tenfold the amount of the coal industry. And we need to really call it a spade here. That's transformation. We need courage. We need future funds that actually deal with these topics and not just make announcements. They need to walk the talk, and then we can be successful. May I just add something as well? Yes, Mr. Cameron, of course. We don't only have transformation, we also have the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. The statistics that the VDA has published is that as early as 2023, we will get back to a level that we had, the production rates that we had before COVID. So all measures that we take right now are supposed to strengthen our business so that we get on the right track. In the past few years, we had a lot of growth. We built up staff and built up know-how. Now we need to see how we can maneuver through the crisis. And that's why we need to initiate measures that make our processes leaner, digitalization, but also other processes. We can't just say we have to have a future-oriented process. Of course, that's necessary, but we also have to cope with the current situation. My direct response to that, Baden-Württemberg is now paying a lot of short-term working funds, and there's some instruments that are quite successful, and Ms. Hofmeister-Kraut already announced certain instruments, and we also have these framework conditions. So these approaches, are they too few, or would you think that it goes in the right direction and will help in this acute situation? It does help at the moment, but as I already pointed out during my presentation, this is a demand crisis. People need to trust in the future. They need to trust in the product. And they still have that for technological reasons, but do they still have trust in the future so that they really want to have this vehicle in the future? If they do not have that, then companies are going to produce less vehicles over a longer period of time. And we have to ask ourselves whether a structural change can be prevented or not. So our priority should be to increase the demand for all kinds of products. Interesting. Mr. Burmeister is keen to respond.
I think we have two different ways to adjust it. Of course, on the one hand is the demand, and I would also like to see that we would have produced 90 million instead of 70 million only. We also have many old cars on our roads. Perhaps we can bring new cars which are better on climate on the road. That would be one thing. And the second way to adjust it is how can we work with the people employed? There are massive changes ahead. I can say I can undergo structural measures, but that means cutting jobs. But you could also do it in a different way. When you look at all the changes we are facing, and you have heard about them this morning, we could also say we take the staff along and take their promise to be ready for transformation. So we can tell them, your job won't be the same, but you will have a job in 2030. And I think a promise like this is something which is not only legitimate, because we have worked on the success in the last 20 years. These people have worked weekends and overtime, so we owe them this promise. And it would also be a deal to use the time. I think it is incredible that we are paying short-time working funds and not use the time that we free up for training, because that would be an opportunity for the future. I saw many people nodding, and I look towards Saskia Drexel, and she has a number of questions from the chat. Saskia says, yes, we have many questions from the chat, and there are two questions to Mr. Burmeister. Mr. Wynn says, does the future not fail due to the organizational structures? Hasn't sitting and waiting been refunded by the success that we saw in the last few years? And how do we convince the heads of organizations so that they are ready to transform? Heads and culture, Mr. Wimmer. I don't think that we have a program to transform heads. With all the optimism to shape, I don't think we can do that. Now, when I look at these different trends, of course, it is not about cutting jobs, but we need to recognize where it makes sense to keep jobs in place. The second thing is to ask, where does the future come from? And the root are not ideas, because we have many ideas, but it's about risk capital. We need to put risk capital into companies where we need it, and we can't hedge it. It's not about replacing a part of the wages, but that we really risk it by putting money into R&D. In the past, there were good examples where taking risks was successfully. I'm from Austria, and the Austrian Post has defined new standards for telecommunication because C radio signals were no longer suitable, and that brought them 2 years ahead of the Americans, Nokia and Ericsson. And that is exclusively due to this advance in standardization. Now we are here in Europe, and we have all our frameworks in place, and nobody really knows how to go ahead. And how can we put capital into startup companies, even if we can't be sure whether it's worthwhile? But if we do that, if we risk that, then we can get all these engineers in jobs again. Because if you slowly take water out of the Titanic, it doesn't really help. We need to take more severe steps. Mrs. Knudgen says, okay, allowing the transformation and risking something is what you suggest. But I think in balance, it's not a big difference to what Mr. Burmeister said, as far as I know that from the discussion. I would like to pass the floor again to Saskia to involve our audience who cannot be here in person today. Saskia says, Thomas Walz from IBM is asking specifically, and I think directed at Mr. Wimmer, where are we in your point of view in Germany or in Baden-Württemberg when we talk about central software topics, for example, open data? Mr. Becker is going to answer. Of course, that is a big question. And I would like to repeat what I already said. In Germany and in Baden-Württemberg, that's the powerhouse of the automotive sector, everything is possible. And what Engelbert said, it's not about being good at something, but it's about doing it and risking it. And here again I see the difficulty. And of course, that is also true with regard to software. This is now the Suppliers' Day, and all the software solutions come from external. Either they are driven by the OEMs, or they are made at entirely different places. This has to change. And that's my concern. But let's stay with Baden-Württemberg and the state of inventors. Why is Baden-Württemberg in such a position? It's because we have a large base of medium-sized companies, enterprises, and they had ingenious engineers with great ideas that they also implemented. And where do we have these software cracks? So people who say, I have this vision in terms of software architecture and functions, user experience and user interfaces that drive the customer benefit. And this is not here. I cannot see it. And to answer your question, I believe we are good at it because we have the engineers, but what is lacking is the entrepreneurial vision to actually implement this. May I add to this? Asks Mr. Wimmer. Yes, of course. We have to differentiate the term software as we understood it, and now software is a continuous process. As Tesla shows, they keep on updating software, but they are not doing that in the depth of it. We need a development path that allows us to carry many functions in fast track through that system. And we need a different network in the cloud with an entirely different logics for car logics and operating systems for cars. So you can make such a list saying why it's not possible and a small list saying what we should do. So once again, I would suggest we need courage and drive that with an entrepreneurial spirit into a mobile backend. And I know that a lot is already on the way, and being courageous would really help. Probably it's not enough to drive it just from Baden-Württemberg. The example of GSM showed it. But due to the quality of products, all the products are in the premium sector, and we can use that pioneering role to define what is supposed to be done. In 1993, the Japanese pushed it against the wall, and we had the chance to become lean or be dead. And we developed the premium sector. And now, in the digital transformation, we also have to redefine what we want to build. And it's not brown plant. Mrs. Knudgen says, yes, that's a good approach, and it shows many opportunities where suppliers can find their own niche and their own market share, their own business model. Franz, you would like to say something? Yes, I would like to illustrate a couple of things. First of all, today platforms determine the world. If you deliver packages, then you know that in many of these deliveries, you get the service from large American companies. Now, the question of the future is who is going to have the traffic platform? The traffic platform will get many data, weather data, traffic data, but also data from vehicles. And in Germany, we have the discussion whether we will manage to create one large traffic platform to build a German asset, or whether there are parties who are reluctant to deliver data due to their individual benefits. And this way they make sure that this collective benefit won't be realized. And this is a discussion that is driven mainly on the national level. And also large suppliers, they have to be engaged and have to provide their data so that Germany can be successful. Because the competitor is not the other OEM, but it's rather the other continent if we talk about platforms. So that is a big issue. And I would also like to talk about a small issue. As a supplier, today, let's say I supply a turned shaft or a casted housing. And if I think about software now, everybody looks at their smartphone. Most people have it already. Then on the smartphone, you have applications. And these apps are very often programmed by small companies. They are suppliers for the system. And the implications for the server in the car is the software as window lever, for example. So now the question is, will these companies manage to deliver the software, or would they leave it up to American companies? So this is a market where we still have open positions, and the opportunities are on the road. Of course, there's a lot to do, and this is something which might be harder for others, but we can link things with data, so that's the Internet of Things, and the chance we have is connectivity. We have to do it. Rolling up our sleeves. And here we have quite a pietistic motivation to work. I'll pass the floor to Saskia again for more questions from the audience. This is a question that goes directly to Mr. Cameron. It's about the focus of sustainability of delivery conditions and of resourcing. Well, it's a large focus, says Mr. Cameron. We all want to reduce our carbon footprint. We look at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. This means manufacturing, premises, and the supply chain. And we have a number of measures how we want to change it. For example, reshaping drive technology in terms of logistics. Also the question on where do we get our commodities from and which energy resources do we use. In logistics and in the production, we will have to lower our carbon footprint in the next few years. Because through legal requirements, logistics will become more expensive, and that will be a driving factor. So that's the environmental part of the question. The second one was the social one and on working conditions. In Germany, we have a law on supply chains, which includes regulations. And then there are different compliances in different companies. We all look into the topic of working conditions and that everything works according to ethical aspects. And I'm convinced that this is the right way. And thirdly, we can't afford that anything goes wrong. The automotive sector has been in a rather negative focus in the last few years, and we don't want to contribute to this image. As the industry, we need to prove that we offer an added value for the society and for our customers. Thank you, Mr. Cameron, for answering this question. I think that was very specific and very analytic. I would like to conclude this panel discussion by extending my thanks to the participants and your flexibility that you answered the questions from our audience and interact. And I think we had a very good conversation here. We need cojones, we need to be courageous to tap this opportunity. We need to have a broad perspective. We need to think out of the box. And the way we thought automotive in the past is not what we need to do in the future. So we need to take all the opportunities that we can see, like autonomous driving, new possibilities of incremental product development through software update in vehicles which have a higher performance, more added value, and a higher share of premium vehicles. So these are the business models in the future, and there are many opportunities for the suppliers to find their new business approach. What I also took down is that we mustn't forget the underwear. The underwear is software. For example, the application to lift car windows in a software-defined car. And suppliers could also see how they can find their niche and their opportunities. So I think that was quite a broad spectrum of analysis, conclusions, fields where we need to do something triggered by the COVID-19 crisis. We also drew the conclusion, what is the impact of COVID-19 and what are other influential patterns like the CO2 legislation and the pressure to reduce our carbon footprint, which is an important factor in the industry. And the trend to electrification, all this we covered today, and we hope that we could give you a lot of stimulus. And we would now say goodbye from the morning session and the live stream. But we already have a date for 2021 for the Suppliers' Day. That's the 11th of November next year. And we hope that we can be live and perhaps we can meet face to face again here in Esslingen in the Neckar Forum with many exciting topics. So this is the end of the live stream. But from 1:45, we open our parallel theme rooms and then the pitch sessions. You can get to the pitch sessions and the theme rooms via the website just by clicking on the item and the button. And then you will see the interaction windows. So it's no longer a live stream. And it's either by Vitero or WebEx. And you can access it without the password. The pitch sessions open 15 minutes before the start. And otherwise, just remain on the webpage where you logged on. If you have dropped out, just log on with the same password as this morning. So goodbye for now, and I hope to see you again next year to the next Suppliers' Day. And I would like to thank everybody who helped make this event happen, also to the technicians and all the helpers here in the hall. And well, we are happy that it succeeded in this new format, and we do apologize for any technical hiccups if we didn't manage to realize everything the way we planned. We're very happy that you joined us today, and we'll see you back here at 1:45 at the Automotive Suppliers' Day.